Hi, I'm Professor Sarah Berry and I'm great company.
Professor. Is that how I should start?
Do you know, I actually got promoted to Professor only a couple of months ago. So this is,
Wow.
I think, my second podcast with that title. This is after 27 years as a scientist and an academic scientist. It's taken a long time. So yeah, use it.
Professor Sarah Berry. I'm going to be really naive throughout this episode, and I apologise if I am. And if I ask any silly questions, feel free to tell me that was a silly question, or you cannot offend me in any way. I want you to know that.
I love silly questions. I have a 12-year-old boy, so
Okay, well, I'm going
that's all
to
I
be
get.
younger than him and say so many things, because I think the conversation, hopefully, that we're going to have today is so important for lots of different reasons. I think it's important to educate myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think people who are listening, it's really important to educate them on what we're going to talk about. And I think it's really important for the women who are listening to maybe understand what perhaps they're going through, and for men to understand and appreciate as well the sort of changes in our own bodies. So before we kick off, can you explain to everyone who you are and what you do?
Okay, so I am Professor now, Sarah
Does
Berry.
that feel good to say?
It feels a bit weird. I am a mum to 2 kids. I have a teenage daughter who loves me sometimes, hates me a lot of the time. I have a 12-year-old son who is still in that I adore my mum phase, but I don't know how much longer that will last. And I'm a wife. And in addition to that, I'm a scientist. And I've been an academic scientist, meaning I'm working at a university teaching students, but also conducting research. And I've been an academic scientist at King's College London for over 25 years.
Wow.
And I work in the area of nutritional science. So I have a PhD in nutritional science. I have spent many years researching all different areas related to diet, cardiovascular disease, how food structure impacts how we respond to food, and more recently menopause as well, and how menopause impacts us, how diet might help alleviate some menopause symptoms. But also I spend a lot of time, as well as my research, myth busting and doing things like this to hopefully communicate evidence-based science, what's real, what's not, because there's a lot of bullshit out there.
There's a lot of shit out
Or
there.
as I call it, there's a lot of nutribollocks out there. Nutrition bollocks. You know, we all eat. What's the one thing that we all do apart from wee poo, sleep? We all eat. And so everyone has an opinion. Everyone thinks they know something about it. And there's a lot of money to be made by certain myths perpetuating.
Really?
So, yeah.
Okay, so why don't we start there? So give me some myths that are out there that you just find completely bonkers that maybe people are following or believing.
So there's some that are more related to my research area. So there's one myth out there that seed oils are toxic. I don't know if you've seen that on social media.
Yeah.
It's nutribollocks. Absolutely codswallop. I love that word.
So when we talk about things like rapeseed oil and things like that.
Oh, it's fine. That's absolute nonsense.
What?
I'm glad you've had that reaction because
I need to phone my wife Sophie. She stopped me from eating to the point. Sarah, sorry to transition really quick.
Should we not bother talking about menopause? Let's just talk about seed
all
oil.
that. Let's talk about it. I have a confectionery company called Candy Kittens, and we are looking very excitedly to create a chocolate. And the chocolate that we are looking at has some seed oil in it. And I gave it to my wife. She said, "I won't eat that because it's got this in it." And I went, "Well, so we've been looking at changing the recipe just because of that." Wow.
The problem is you go into social media, if you put seed oils in, you get these like crazy things saying seed oils are toxic, they're going to kill you. Absolute nonsense.
But where has that come from? Why do people think seed oils are bad?
Oh, it comes from often people's misunderstanding of the evidence. So if I could give you an example, we know that the intake of seed oils has increased over the last 20, 30 years. It's in a lot of heavily processed, unhealthy foods. At the same rate, that at the same time that the seed oil intake has increased, obesity has increased, heart disease, has increased, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can look at a nice, simple kind of figure and say, oh, okay, well, as seed oils has increased, so has all of this other stuff. So has cancers. It must be due to seed oils. But actually, if you take a step back, it's not due to seed oils itself. I think what else has happened in the last 50 years? We have sedentary jobs. We're eating loads of crap food. And so it's easy to pin it down to that. So it's, again, cherry picking evidence.
If someone's listening right now and they have been saying on their Instagram, their social posts, they have heard it on podcasts, that something like seed oils are bad, they're probably going to sit here and go, well, hang on a second. I've been told all of this information. Well, how can people get fake information on something like seed oils saying it's bad? Where does that come from?
So I think this is a huge problem with nutrition communication, that everyone has an opinion on it. A lot of the people talking about it are people that aren't evidence-based scientists, that don't understand how to interpret the evidence. And you can often pick up, a scientific paper, and there's different ways of interpreting the evidence. It's not so much the knowledge, it's how you interpret the data, the studies. And I've seen this in newspapers. There's been some studies that you see in one newspaper, an article that might say, this fat's bad for you. And another article from exactly the same study that's just been published saying, whoa, this fat's good for you. And often it's about, well, what are we comparing that fat to? What are we replacing when we add that fat in? And the same kind of applies to seed oils, that you can interpret it different ways. And the problem is a lot of the people making the big noise on social media about seed oils, and I'm going to get seed oil hate mail now. I can see this.
I'll be with you to collect it, don't worry.
I'm not all, but, often aren't interpreting the evidence correctly.
Yeah.
So, for example, there's one particular study that people use as evidence for seed oils. And I don't know whether you want me to go into the details of this, or
I want you to honestly this is your forum. Take as long as you want to explain or talk about anything.
Okay. I'm going off on a tangent, but this is a great example.
Just to let you know, if this was, I'm so excited that I get to be in the room with you, because I would listen to this podcast if I saw it come out. So I'm just excited to be here. So you just go.
Thank you. So, for example, there's this one study where this was some years ago, where they wanted to look at the effects of adding in a particular type of fat and see how it impacts your health. And so they were going to add in seed oils in order to increase this particular type of fat. It's a particular type of polyunsaturated fat. So you might have heard of like omega-3 fats, which are found in fish oil. And then there's the omega-6, which is another type of polyunsaturated fatty acid.
Got it.
And
I take omega-3.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Great. That's good.
I keep it in the fridge.
Don't think you need to do that.
Someone told me that, and then it really smells of fish.
Okay, I haven't heard that,
Okay.
but if you've got space in your fridge, I don't see why not.
Okay.
But the other polyunsaturated fat is these omega-6 fats, and these are the ones that are in seed oils. And it's believed that these fats are pro-inflammatory, they increase inflammation. But actually, when you, as humans, as we eat them, they are not pro-inflammatory in the way that we previously believed. But anyway, in this particular study, they fed people over a period of time these polyunsaturated omega-6 fats, but in the form of seed oils. But a lot of the fat that they fed them was in the form of seed oils that had been modified to be used in spreads, in like margarines.
Mm-hmm.
And back in those days, they used a process called partial hydrogenation that produced something called trans fats. So the food industry used to convert a liquid seed oil into a hard fat using this process called partial hydrogenation.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, it was considered, this is great because it means we can produce hard fat in replacement of butter really cheaply.
Got it.
It also might be better for our health, because we know that saturated fat, which is in butter, isn't great for our health. Anyway, we now know that trans fats are really bad for us. So they're no longer produced by the food industry. They're no longer in our foods. But this study that was conducted some years ago was taking seed oils and converting it into these bad fats. And they were giving people seed oils in the form of seed oil, as in rapeseed oil itself, but also in the form of these, what we now know as bad fats.
So they were clumping them together?
Yeah, because they originated from the same seed oil. And so obviously we now know we were feeding these people trans fats, which we know are really bad for you. They increase your cholesterol, they increase your inflammation, they do loads of bad things in the body. And so to say that putting rapeseed in your chocolate or your candy is bad for you because of that study is nonsense, because we don't even use rapeseed or seed oils in that way anymore. And it's just not a appropriate or correct comparison. So this is how you can misinterpret the evidence. If you hadn't really dived into the paper and looked at the publication and looked at, well, how were these seed oils being fed to people? What was being done to them? Then obviously you can make the interpretation that, holy shit, these are bad for you.
These studies, is it right that historically have been mostly done on men?
So I can explain why lots of research is done on men from a very pragmatic personal experience as well. So having been in the research field now for 25 years, I've conducted about 30 clinical trials. So 30 trials where I feed people different types of food for however long, and then measure how it changes different parameters of health. Apart from the ZOE Predict research and one other study, all of those 28 other studies were done on men. My studies, always conducted on men. Why? Because they're easiest to study. And I'm sorry to say that. Things are changing, and I'm not saying it is the right way. We live in a very competitive funding environment. So for me as a scientist to get money to do studies, so I might have this amazing idea. If I can't get money to run that study, I can't run that study. I have to apply to grant bodies to get the funding. I have to be competitive. I have to think of everywhere I can reduce my cost. Now, if I want to look at how, let's say how seed oil impacts a particular health measure, inflammation, if I was to do it in men, I could recruit a third of the number of men than if I was to do it in women. The reason is because for women, I'd have to think about recruiting people who are pre-menopausal, peri-menopausal, post-menopausal. I would also have to think about the phase of their menstrual cycle. What phase are they in for when they come in for me to take the blood? And so it might take a longer period of time. So it's so much more expensive because women are more complicated. And I know that's a real cliche thing to say, and I don't mean it in that cliche way, but biologically we are complicated because of these hormonal changes. So women traditionally have not been studied, partly because it's cheaper to study men. It's easier, it's more convenient. It's changing, and this is the good news. Grant bodies recognise that we have to be able to study women as well. And so it is changing now, but historically that was the case. So I can tell you how seed oils affect you, Jamie, but not how they affect me. That they're not bad for you, that's what I'll say. Your inflammation is absolutely fine. So go put them in your chocolate.
I can't wait, I'm going to go and eat them all. Can't wait. I don't even know where to begin on this subject because I don't even know what menopause is. I know it's something that happens to women. I know it happens to women at a certain time in their life. I don't know what it affects, what happens. I hear this word and I feel slightly ashamed. I don't really know what it is. So can you explain to me what menopause is?
I can, but I think, Jamie, the first thing to say is you're not alone. Even as a woman, until I started the peri-menopause transition, which I'll explain what that is, I didn't really know what it was, or until I started researching it, because we don't talk about it. We're starting to talk about it. We certainly didn't talk about it. Like, I vaguely recall my mum being a bit hot and sweaty in the night, but God forbid, you didn't say the word menopause. It just wasn't said. I don't know. It's like growing up, I was a child growing up in the 80s. You didn't talk about sex. You don't talk about menopause. You don't talk about menstruation. That's it. It's changing. And that's the good thing. And so for those that don't know what menopause is, menopause, simply put, is the point at which is a year after you've had your last period. So you've last menstruated. So it's menopause, the pausing or cessation of menstruation. The thing is, you don't go to bed one night, pre-menopausal, having periods, and then wake up the next day and, hey, I'm post-menopausal. It's not like that. There's a menopause transition, and we call that the peri-menopause. And this is the point at which your estrogen starts to decline, because what stops you having periods and why you go into menopause is because your estrogen's declined, and your estrogen is at a point at which therefore you're not menstruating. But you don't have like suddenly loads of estrogen next day, that's it. You don't even have this nice slow gradual decline in estrogen. You go on a roller coaster. So you literally, you might be plodding along in your 40s, okay, and then suddenly it's like it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, so up. And this is what's so confusing for women, because I think again, until I started researching, I didn't know that. I just thought, oh, I might reduce a bit and I might get a bit of a hot flush or might get a bit of brain fog. But it sets your body into this kind of roller coaster of craziness. And the reason is because you have estrogen receptors all over your body, in your brain, in your bones, everywhere. And this is why menopausal symptoms are so widespread, because the reduction in estrogen, the fluctuations in estrogen, impact nearly every cell in your body.
So explain to me what happens when you, as a woman, when you're going through menopause. What happens to your mind, your body? What goes on?
So when you're going through menopause, when you're in that menopause transition, that's the period that most people have symptoms of menopause. So by this, these are the kind of symptoms that we are talking about more, like brain fog, anxiety, palpitations in the morning, aching bones, loss of libido, poor sleep, change in body fat distribution. There's about 50 different symptoms. There's 20 that are very common. You have your symptoms, which we can pick up on in more detail if you want to, that are particularly bad during that peri-menopausal phase, during that transition phase. They still continue after the menopause. They still continue after, that menopause transition phase. But what also happens at the same time, and I don't think we're talking about this enough, really, we're starting to talk about symptoms, but your change in risk of disease also changes.
What do you mean by that?
Estrogen impacts a lot of the way that our blood vessels work, our body metabolizes food, because like I said, it affects every cell in our body. And so the way that our body has functioned from a kind of disease perspective also changes. So I can outline some results from some of our research to illustrate this. So if we look in our ZOE Predict cohort, so this is in a couple of thousand people, and we look at key risk factors for disease. So these are chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, so blood pressure, cholesterol, inflammation, body fat around the belly, for example. So if we look at those in our individuals and we look across different ages, what you see is that these risk factors increase as you age. So your blood pressure, as a natural part of aging, goes up. Now, we can go on to talk about how we can minimize that through diet and lifestyle, but generally it will go up as you age. Your cholesterol goes up, particularly your bad cholesterol, which we call the LDL cholesterol. Levels of inflammation go up, and you tend to start putting a little bit of weight around the belly. That starts to go up. Now, what happens is that up until the menopause, men are on a different trajectory than women. Women are doing quite well. So men have, at any given age, on average, slightly higher blood pressure, slightly higher cholesterol, slightly higher inflammation, etc. And women, for once, are kind of smiling. We're a bit smug at this point because we're doing a bit better. What happens is you hit the late 40s. So the average age of menopause is 51. The average age of perimenopause is about 47. You hit your late 40s. Suddenly, women who've been having this nice, like slower trajectory, suddenly, wham, it goes up. Suddenly their blood pressure, their cholesterol, their inflammation, their fat tissue around their tummy suddenly goes up to the level of men. And this is because they're losing estrogen, and the estrogen is involved in many of the processes that help maintain a healthy blood pressure, help maintain a healthy cholesterol, help maintain appropriate inflammatory responses. And so suddenly, therefore, your disease risk increases the same level as men, in some cases might go above it. And so I think it's important we talk about symptoms, but I think it's also important for women to recognize that this is also a point in time to really take stock of how diet and lifestyle can help reduce your risk of some of these chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, like type 2 diabetes, like obesity as well, because you're fighting a bit of a tidal wave as well.
It must be so scary that if you're suddenly just experiencing these things and you don't really know what's going on. Why do I feel anxious? Why are my hormones all over the place? What is going on? And if we don't talk about it, dare I say it, I feel like relationships must break down during this period, because why would people understand if something is going on within someone's body?
Yeah, and I think it's so hidden. So the disease risk factors that we talked about are hidden unless you're going to the doctor and, having, blood samples or having your blood pressure measured. The symptoms are also something you're suffering. And many women who are now in that perimenopausal phase, like I am, are of a generation where we didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
Our parents, my mum, never talked about it. You suck it up and you get on with it. I'm really lucky that it's changing, that I feel I can talk about it. And for my daughter, I think it will be even better, because I think she's being brought up in an environment where, yes, you do talk about it. But it impacts all aspects of your life. I can be bloody grumpy and irritable. Like, ask my husband, and he'll honestly, like, the amount of times he's like, Sarah, I told you this. And it almost feels like a cop out for me to say, oh, yeah, but it's because I'm peri-menopausal. I've got brain fog. That's why. That's actually what's going on with me. But even though I research it, feel like, oh, I can't really say that. We know from our own research that 99.8% of people, women of that age in our cohort, have at least one menopausal symptom. 66% of people, women in the peri and postmenopausal stage, have 12 or more symptoms. 80% of women who are perimenopausal, so around my age, have sleep disturbances. 85% have anxiety, palpitations when they wake up, brain fog, mood swings, all of these things going on that we're contending with. Now, the good news, there is some things you can do about it, but the bad news is, until now, we weren't talking about it and we weren't helping solve it. 10% of women leave their jobs because of menopause. There was this YouGov survey that was done, and that asked people, and they specified that the reason they left it was because they could not cope in a working environment with the symptoms. They felt embarrassed because they were forgetting things. They weren't sleeping, so they couldn't cope the next day. Their anxiety of going out into a normal workforce. And 30% of women say their symptoms are so debilitating it's having a significant impact on their quality of life. And to think that for generations, we've not recognised this and talked about this. And, my mother's no longer alive. And I feel sad that I wasn't appreciative of, actually, probably she was having a difficult time.
That's really sad. And thank you for explaining that. If you were going to go into the symptoms, you mentioned there were 50 different types of symptoms.
Yeah.
But you said some people experience 12. What would those 12 symptoms be if someone was experiencing that?
So the most common symptoms we find in our research is sleep disturbances, change in energy, like how energetic they feel, change in how they feel their metabolism is working, change in lots of cognitive aspects, so the brain fog, the memory loss. I mean, honestly.
Why does memory loss happen?
Because you've got estrogen receptors in your brain. You've got estrogen receptors everywhere. Irritability.
So you become forgetful, or you just literally have memory loss?
So things like, you introduced me to your wonderful team earlier, and I'm not going to remember anyone's name. If you'd have asked me 5 years ago, I'd have remembered everyone's name. It's that kind of thing. I mean, when I go into, I'm one of the things I'm filled with fear about. I love socializing. I'm very chatty, as you can tell. But when I go to parties and I might have to introduce my husband to work people who I might have worked with for ages and, have an incredibly close relationship with, I get this like, oh my God, I can't remember their name. Shit. It's awful. I can't remember their name. That didn't happen 5 years ago. But I can still be high functioning as a scientist, but then you have that kind of momentary memory loss. So these are the kind of common symptoms: are irritability, mood swings, change in your body composition. So estrogen changes where you distribute your body fat. So men typically have what we call an apple shape, i.e. you have fat around the abdomen, around your tummy, and women tend to, up to the menopause, have what we call pear shape. So, nice little bottom and hips. So the fat is distributed there. That's because, in very simple terms, your estrogen is kind of directing the fat to be distributed there. Once you lose estrogen, it's no longer directed to your hips and your thighs, and so it's then directed more to your tummy. So this is a really common symptom that women have, that suddenly their fat where their tummy is suddenly increases. Apart from the aesthetics is also the fact that we know that fat around the belly is really bad for us. It's metabolically really active compared to fat anywhere else in our body. So it produces more inflammatory chemicals. It is more involved in mechanisms that we know are unfavourable for cardiovascular disease, for example. And so suddenly, as well as, oh shit, I don't look quite so good in my bikini, you're also increasing your risk of chronic disease as well.
And I'm assuming, harder to lose weight once.
Yeah.
you've hit menopause.
So this is a really good example of where you're just in this catch-22, or it's like a perfect storm, I think is a good way to describe it. Now, I don't want to be really defeatist, but I think that it's important to acknowledge there's this perfect storm, because I think it can allow women to understand why, despite all of these things they're doing, why am I just not shifting the weight? So you've got these symptoms. You've got lack of sleep a lot of the time. You might be having these mood swings or depression or anxiety. Do you want to exercise and eat healthy if you're feeling really bloody fed up? I certainly don't. We know if you have a bad night's sleep that the next day the reward centers in your brain are heightened. So if you have a bad night's sleep, Jamie, the next day your reward center is going to say, "Hey, Jamie, go and eat." I don't know what's your kind of treat food that you know is
Candy,
bad
kids,
for
and
you.
sweets.
Okay, go and eat loads of these candy, kids, and sweets. So you're craving, but as well as craving those, because the reward centers in your brain are going, "Whoa, I need a quick fix." The way you metabolize those are different. And so we've got some great research that we've published as well, showing that if you have a carbohydrate load, exactly the same one day versus another day, but all that's changed is your sleep, you have a difference in the way you metabolize that. So if you have a good night's sleep, firstly, your reward centers are like, "Oh, I'll just eat a normal healthy breakfast." You'll have a nice, calm glucose increase, so blood sugar after that breakfast. If you've had a bad night's sleep, your reward centers are like, "Go eat those candy cake." So what they're called?
Candy kittens.
Candy kittens. Sorry. Go eat those candy kittens. And also, your body is going to have a worse blood sugar response to those candy kittens. So you're going to have this big peak, and then you might have a slump, and the dip in the glucose causes you to go on and eat more food, etc. And so the sleep is having that effect as well on what choices you're making and how you respond to it. So, and this is a great example of what we've also talked about how you eat, that, sleep can impact how you respond to food as well as the rate at which you eat. So you've got peri or postmenopausal women who, not all, but many aren't sleeping very well. So are making the,
Wrong choices. You're caught in this cycle.
Feeling a bit shit, not wanting to exercise. And then the loss of estrogens causing all of the fat to go around their tummy, causing more of it to be laid down. And so you're kind of in this vicious circle, and it's really hard to break. And so it requires more willpower. It requires more work. And this is what you hear people anecdotally, often saying, "I'm eating exactly the same, but I'm more hungry." Yeah, estrogen affects your hunger receptors. So unfortunately, what used to keep you full before doesn't necessarily keep you full now. How you're responding to it is differently. You're not sleeping, etc. So it's really difficult. But it's not all gloom and doom.
No.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that, it is tough. Now, what we do know is that HRT can help. So hormone replacement therapy, if you can take it, not everyone can take it. Not everyone responds well to it. Some people respond really well, some people less well. On average, that can do a lot to help people. But what we also know from some research that we've only just recently published is diet can also help. Now, I was really skeptical when I started out on this research about diet, because I was very much like, nope, you just need to take HRT, get the estrogen back in there.
What is HRT quickly?
So HRT is hormone replacement therapy. Very simply, it's giving you estrogen back into your body. You can take it different ways. Typically, you have it what we call transdermally. So it's like a gel or a patch that you put typically like on your thigh or on your arm. And so that you're absorbing the estrogen back in that you're losing. In the old days, they gave hormone replacement therapy in the form of a tablet. But we know that the way you metabolize that isn't very good for your health. And so younger people listening to this, it might not be so relevant, but older people listening to this might still remember 20 years ago when these big headlines came out in the newspaper saying HRT is really bad. First, it increases your risk of heart attack and cardiovascular disease. That was based on a study that was actually a very poorly conducted study to answer that specific question, but using tablet form of HRT. So you've got many women who are probably my age or a little bit older that remember that and are not taking HRT because they're scared of the risk because of this study. But actually, if you're taking HRT in the way that it's given now, which is through the skin, then there isn't a risk for the majority of the people. Now, I do need to caveat this with I'm not a medical doctor. I am a scientist, and I'm just presenting the evidence that we now know.
So tell me more about the time when you felt a little bit...
Sorry, I've got delivery? I'm so sorry. So sorry. It won't take a second. It's your Hellofresh.
Producer Jemima. It's Hellofresh?
Yes, your Hellofresh.
Okay.
Honestly, won't take a second.
You're going to love this. Okay, quickly. HelloFresh is just one of the greatest things in the entire world. Firstly, fresh food delivered right to your door. Isn't that right, Jemima?
It is.
The meal's in here. Sorry about this. We have a sweet potato satay curry, which is,
God.
I mean, firstly, perfect for Halloween. Oh my God, so many delicious things. We have a little dessert. We have a choco pop.
Delicious, delicious.
Okay, so right now, if you order HelloFresh, you get 60% off and also 25% off your next 2 months and a free dessert for life.
Sorry, free dessert for life?
Free dessert for life. So this is for all customers who are new and customers who cancelled in the last 12 months. Just scan the QR code, right? Mm-hmm. And there's T's and C's applies. It's amazing. Okay, right, do you want me to take that one?
All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Jemima. Can I ask, this might be a really dumb question, because evolution has led us to these situations where menopause seems to happen. So, but then we're fighting it for obvious reasons, which you've explained. But then why has evolution done that?
So there's a couple of theories here. One theory is, well, actually, majority of us 100, 200 years ago were dead by then. So it didn't really matter.
True.
There's another theory, and I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's like this grandma theory. I'm not using the correct fancy terminology, but this is how I understand it to be. That in the days where we were hunter-gatherers, where, when you were in your prime of your 20s, for example, you were still needing to go out there to be very physically active. Someone had to look after your children. So remember, like 300-400 years ago, most people were having kids in their late teens, early 20s. So therefore, when women were reaching their mid-40s or early 50s, that was nature's way of saying, okay, you can't have any more children so that you can look after your grandchildren, to allow that generation, i.e. your daughter, to go and do the work she needs to do. And I don't mean the work in the office. So there's that grandma theory about it as well, because back then people weren't using birth control. People every year or so were producing babies. And so this is a way that's like, okay, enough.
My mum sent me a message because I asked her what happened when she went through menopause. And I said, what was that? And she went, oh, I remember that. And I haven't listened to her voice note, but I thought I would play it to you because
Great.
It might be interesting to see what she says about it. So I'm going to play it now.
Hi, Jampot. Message for you in answer to your question to me. But I'm not sure you're going to want to listen to it because I'm your mother and you'll probably have your fingers in your ears when you hear what I'm going to say. Menopause. I actually got the menopause relatively early, I think. I started when I was between 46 and 48 and didn't really struggle hugely with things that my girlfriends struggled with. I managed hot flushes and I still slept fine and everything else. For me, the biggest change and the most difficulty has been the change in sexual sexual life, in that your libido drops significantly. And of course, men's libidos don't seem to change. So there becomes a disparity, which is, I find, very difficult to deal with. And I wish I could have the sexual enthusiasm of my youth. So that's probably my main thing. Secondly, I didn't do HRT because I had two girlfriends who swear they got breast cancer due to it. And when I tried it, all it did to me was seem to make me bleed all the time. So I abandoned any form of HRT, and maybe that would have made a huge difference to me. On a vanity side, I really miss my lovely, bouncy, glossy hair. I would love my hair back too. But apart from that, I didn't find the menopause too difficult. Could you ask your lovely expert how to get my sexual function back to my youth? That would be very nice. Thank you very much.
Love
So
it.
that was my mum, Penny, who is the greatest. I mean, lots to unpack there. So, I mean, firstly, let's talk about libido, because that's probably a really important thing, right? And from what my mum is saying, and even though it's from my mum, I think it's important, that must be a difficult thing for both sides of a relationship, especially between, men and women.
Yeah. Again, because it's not talked about. And so a lot of men won't understand, well, that's why my partner, my wife, whatever, isn't interested. But we know, again, from our own research, and this is some research in 70,000 people, that was one of the most common symptoms, which really surprised me. And what was interesting, and I loved hearing this from your mum, is that we find that actually the libido, loss of sexual interest, and some of the other symptoms that I've mentioned, like the sleep irritability, are so much more common than the hot flushes. That hot flushes are one of the least common symptoms. Someone might have one or two. Some people, yes, it might impact them massively. But traditionally, we have thought of, or women have thought of, menopausal symptoms as the hot flushes. We haven't talked about any of this other stuff, including loss of libido. But our research shows it's one of the least of the common symptoms. And yet I still think there's this fixation on these hot flushes. We call them in science vasomotor symptoms. And so most of the research that's been done to do with menopause is looking at how diet or lifestyle or this supplement or that supplement can impact what we call vasomotor symptoms, which is basically the hot flushes. People haven't started looking at how we can then help minimize the loss of libido. And it's really interesting that when I came into this, I hadn't thought about this as being one of the big problems. And we're seeing this in our data. There are lots of advocates out there, though, for how we can help to improve, who aren't scientists, but have a good understanding of some of the data out there. So even people like Davina McCall, for example, and she talks a lot, not just about all the other symptoms, but about the impact that it has on your sexual function, on your libido, on your sexual desire, etc. And how for her, testosterone has worked. It's different for different women, but there are other options you can take in addition to the traditional HRT, which is the estrogen, that might help as well.
My mum also mentioned she said that her friends swear by the fact that they did HRT, and that was the link between their breast cancer. Any truth in that?
So there is some evidence to show that if you are at increased risk of breast cancer, or if you've had breast cancer in the past, that it may increase your risk of future breast cancer. The data has been quite inconsistent around HRT use and breast cancer for those who aren't at risk. And this is partly because, like that trial I referred to earlier, some of the way that studies have been run. I think the totality of the evidence shows that the increase in risk of breast cancer, if you are not already at risk, and it's really important to caveat that, but for the majority of people is very, very, very minimal. And so if you are being bothered by your symptoms, which most people are, that it is impacting your life, that again, it's an individual choice. But I chose, when I hit about the age of 45, I chose to take HRT because I had a couple of hot flushes, but I was grumpy, I was irritable, I wasn't sleeping well. I knew that my body was changing. I chose to take that knowing that, yes, maybe I'm at increased risk of breast cancer and I'm not even aware of it, and maybe this will compound it, but actually the benefit that it's going to have for the rest of my life.
Makes total sense.
And the benefit that it has in terms of other disease. So when I mentioned that when you go through the menopause, your blood pressure increases, your cholesterol increases, your inflammation increases. If you take HRT, our research and other research shows that it attenuates, so it reduces that increase in blood pressure, that increase in cholesterol, that increase in inflammation. So I've also taken it. Again, this is my choice because I believe that it will help reduce the natural increase that I would have got in some of these disease risk factors as well as the symptoms.
So is there sort of scientific suggestion or a personal suggestion to start thinking about menopause before it's even happened? So perhaps changing diet or perhaps taking HRT before that's even happened?
I think that I would caution about anyone taking HRT before they need to take HRT. I would suggest is the discussion you should have with a medical practitioner. I'm not a medical practitioner. I think that we should be having a healthy diet, healthy lifestyle all our life. The reality is we don't. Now, a lot of the time people have a wake-up call, whether it was COVID or whether it's that you're going through the menopause. A lot of the time this is a wake-up call for many women that, I'm not feeling the same. I've got to do something about it. The stronger and healthier we are going into the menopause, the better. So, for example, we have some interesting data showing that people who are overweight or living with obesity, they have a lot higher rates of symptoms. If you're entering the menopause physically inactive, you're also more likely to have symptoms. So if you can enter the menopause transition in your early 40s, our bodies are changing anyway because we're aging. But if you can enter that your kind of 40s and start your 40s thinking about making sure you're getting yourself in good shape for it, great, because we know it will help reduce some of your symptoms. So you're not getting in that vicious kind of circle.
You mentioned your research into diet. How can that help?
So our research shows that following a healthy, balanced diet can reduce your risk of symptoms by about 35%. Now, that's huge. I must say, being very skeptical, I went into that research thinking, diet's not going to make any impact. Just go on HRT, that's it. I was really surprised by the results.
Wow.
Really surprised. Now, this research was from people following the ZOE program, and this is a personalized nutrition program. So there's a few different things that are changing as well. So we do encourage people to be physically active as well as changing their diet. So I can't say that 35% is purely due to diet, but what we know is people following an overall healthier diet, we do know that that reduces your symptoms. There are a lot of supplements out there that claim to do all wonders for menopause, these silver bullets. This is where I'm really skeptical. There's a term we use in menopause research called meno-washing. I don't know if you've heard of that term.
Sounds like greenwashing or...
Yeah. Stick meno in front of it. You can charge 10 times as much. There's menopause hair.
Wow.
Shampoos. Your mum said she had problems with her hair.
Yeah.
This is really common, skin and hair problems with menopause, just because, again, it's impacting all of our health. But changing your shampoo, or rather spending 10 times as much on your normal shampoo because it's got meno in front of it, it's not going to make your mum's hair any glossier, unfortunately, than it is.
And so companies are selling these products because they know it's 50% of the population who are going through it.
Yeah. So I think, Jamie, one really good thing about the last 10 years or 5 years is that we're starting to talk about menopause. But the downside of that is miscommunication. And the downside is people trying to make money out of it. And so these menopause supplements or menopause face cream. I mean, I don't even know what that's about. Why would you change your cream? Because you're in menopause? Maybe it's a bit drier, so just get a thicker cream. I have no idea what the difference is.
You mentioned that 10% of women have claimed that they have left their businesses due to menopause. And, thank God that I've sat here with you and understood it more. So as a partner, maybe I can be more sympathetic and understanding towards it. But how can we change that sort of narrative within business? What can we do to help women, I suppose?
So there are some companies already starting to think about how can we change not just the narrative, but what we're doing. How can we support women going through the menopause transition? And there's lots of businesses now that have workplace advisors in place. They have menopause, lifestyle consultants coming in to talk through this. I think it's allowing people to feel that they can talk about it. So allowing those women that can't remember X, Y, and Z to be able to, if they feel comfortable, explain ways, or rather the people around them understand it's due to menopause. When I was in my 20s, it didn't even figure in my head. And so I would have just thought whoever that, 50-year-old woman that was being a bit, dare I say it, ditzy, I now realise, gosh, wasn't that awful? That's how I thought. But it's because you just don't think so. I think it's about educating people from a young age so that they're more empathetic as well. So the ownership isn't just on the boss of the company to put whatever support in place, but for everyone to be more mindful that we don't know what's going on, do we, with people?
And I suppose someone listening to this right now who maybe it's a woman and they're going through it and they're understanding themselves better, but also if it's some man listening to it and perhaps thinking, maybe this is happening to my partner at this time. I mean, being more sympathetic
Yeah.
and understanding
Yeah.
in that process is probably going to help a lot, isn't it?
But I do think there's a real generational thing. So my husband was brought up where it wasn't talked about. And I do think our children's generation, I'm really hopeful that it is something people are more mindful of, people are more aware of, people are more understanding of.
It's so funny because I would have no problem talking about it. But obviously there is this, I don't know, unspoken issue about it. But for me, I would just be like, oh my God, I would be so open with it.
But you went on reality TV and talked
that's
about
so
all
true.
sorts.
I know, I forgot. I totally forgot how open I am. But I think
I think you're unusual. I think that is quite unusual. But I think you are that slightly younger generation as
Maybe.
well. So I'm talking about my generation, like late 40s, early 50s, who I think, it has been a taboo. And I think it's not till you get to the menopause you start talking about it. But then what's really interesting, and your mum said this as well, is the variety of symptoms. That there's this perception that it's just about hot flushes. Well, it's not. But also how everyone's symptoms are so different. And every day is so different because, in that transition, your hormones are going up and down and all over the place. And it's really difficult for women to kind of quantify their symptoms. It's really difficult for people to understand, well, what's the burden of my symptoms? So we've generated something at ZOE, building on the last kind of 5 years of research we've been doing on the menopause, called the Menoscale Calculator. And this is a free online resource that anyone can go on, and it asks you about what symptoms you have. So we ask people about the 20 most common symptoms, the kind of symptoms we've been talking about today. So it first asks you, do you have these? And then for each symptom, it asks you on a scale of 0 to 5, how impactful they are on your life, what burden do they have on your life? And then we create a score out of 100. And that score out of 100 is an overall score to tell you how much of an impact menopause is having for you on your life. And what's really good about this tool is that when you're going through that menopause transition, you might go to your doctor and you might say, this is what happened for me. I think I should go on HRT. They say, track your symptoms. Well, apart from a scrappy piece of paper that I don't know about you, but I lose every scrappy piece of paper that I have. How are you going to track them? How do you know how they're changing? Because every day they're changing, every week they're changing. And so this is a really great way that you can track your symptoms so that you can see, for example, if you decide to go on HRT, is HRT improving it? So like for your mum, it didn't seem to have an impact. She could have tracked it. She might have actually seen that actually there's so many symptoms she hadn't thought were menopause, and actually it is improving it. But also how changing my diet can improve it. And so it might be people decide, okay, I'm going to try physical activity. I'm going to try changing my diet. Oh, but I don't know if it's having an impact, because it's so difficult to remember how crap you might have felt previously when you're feeling good, isn't it? And so what's great about this calculator is this free online resource. It takes about 2 minutes to fill out, and it's a way of you can get a score, an overall score. So you can see if you decide to make a change to a diet or lifestyle, you could measure it every day if you want, every week, every month, however you want to do it. And you can see how, or what works for you.
I think it's so, Sarah, firstly, thank you for educating me. And I'm sure educating a lot of people. And I think as a partner, a son, a brother, I think being more appreciative and understanding of this is really important. We like to end it with 8 questions. Are you ready for this?
Yep.
What's a saying or phrase that you want people to come away from this interview with?
So I would say, if a food is too healthy to be enjoyed, it's just not healthy at all.
Love that. Best compliment anyone's ever given you for your work?
Oh, I was going to say the compliment you gave me earlier, that my skin is really
It's fantastic.
nice. That's not my work.
It's fantastic.
So I spent quite a bit of time working on this ZOE Predict study, which was quite a groundbreaking study looking at the variability between and within people in how they respond to food. And this is having worked for about 20 years as an academic scientist. And it ended up making the cover of the New York Times. And I remember waking up and seeing that, and it was just like, wow, little old Sarah, who's been plugging away with these research studies for however long, her research is on the front cover of New York Times. I mean, that blew my mind. And, that goes back to this way that as scientists, we're very much, we stay in our lane, we don't step out of it. And that was like
High
a
five.
big moment. Thank you.
That's a great moment. What's the scariest thing about the menopause or people's knowledge or lack thereof?
The billions and billions of pounds that are spent on absolute nutribolics that is not going to help people. And the millions of pounds that's spent on testing, because your estrogen fluctuates from one day to the next. Doing hormonal testing, unless you can afford to have it every day, it's a total waste of money.
When was the last time you cried and why?
Oh, this is getting a bit personal.
I know. And as a scientist, you won't like that.
The last time I cried was in July at my son's last day of primary school when they do this graduation ceremony. And I cried because it was a sign that my son is growing up, that he's entering the next phase of his life. I cried for what I was losing, which was all of these amazing friendships that I have at his school.
Yeah.
And my daughter went there, and it's been part of my daily routine. Despite juggling 2 jobs, I would drop my children's school every single day.
Wow.
I'd collect them most days and then carry on working. That's been part of my life. And I also cried for what I worried that I hadn't done, which I know is a terrible thing. Like, had I been there enough for the kids? Have I put work before the kids? Have I given enough time? Have I read him enough bedtime stories? It's all of those things that now that I know that he's entering into teenageism, that he's not going to want me to do anymore. Did I do it enough? Did I appreciate those baths that he used to jump into when I'd just be like, just leave me alone. I want to have a bath alone. Why didn't I appreciate those at the time?
That was very honest. I love it.
I'm always honest.
That was amazing. What's something you can't let go of?
So I think if I'm to say what I can't let go of in terms of what I do, so not so much at a personal level, it's the truth. And I know that sounds a bit cliched again, but there are so much mistruths around science, so many different ways of spinning evidence. And it's only as I've become more aware of this influencer world and podcasts and stuff, I've realised how many mistruths are out there. And so something I will never let go of, however boring my message is, however much I might ruin the party, I will always stick to evidence-based research.
It's a good answer. What's something that people are most embarrassed to admit with menopause?
I do think the generation slightly above me, so people who are kind of in their 60s, would be embarrassed, I think, from discussions I've had, to talk about how much it's impacting them and therefore feel a failure. So embarrassed to feel that it's impacted them to an extent that they have failed at something, because it's something that, you know, our previous generations, you just suck it up, you just get on with it. So it's feeling like it's impacting you.
Great answer. What's your biggest turn on?
McDonald's after the pub, bacon sarnie with white bread and lashings of butter the morning after the pub. I'm going to get killed if you put this on by everyone that knows me, but it's fine. It's the truth.
It's the truth. I like it. What's your biggest turn off?
Insincerity.
And what do you like most about yourself?
Can I have 2, actually?
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm very tolerant.
Mm-hmm.
As I've got older, I've become tolerant to people and how we all have things going on that people don't know about. And,
We all have a boulder.
yeah. But I think loyalty, that's something I pride myself on. I'm a slow burner. It took me 10 years to say yes to my husband, to marry him. But once you've got me.
I love that. Bonus one, your favourite swear word.
Do you know, I never say the F word. My husband says it far too much. My 12-year-old has started saying it. But I say bollocks an awful lot. And there's a big conversation we have at home where I tell my son not to swear. And he's like, but you say bollocks all the time. And I'm like, well, that's not really a swear word.
Kind of is a swear word.
Don't tell him that.
Sarah, thank you so much.
Oh, it's
I
been
think this has been
fun.
fantastic, and I hope so many people are going to take so much away from this, and everything's going to be in the show description, so go and check it out there. Professor Sarah Berry, thank you so much for coming on Great Company.
Oh, thank you. That was fun.
That was amazing.
I enjoyed that.
Much.